All right, so last time we talked about setting up the social environment. And before that, we talked about the physical environment and the time aspect of the environment in an early childhood classroom. And so I'm going to continue that talk about the social guidance aspect. And last week we talked about some aspects of a positive verbal environment, and I'm going to continue that and build upon some of those steps that we talked about and put them together into a sequence called a personal message sequence. And then in the next part, we'll talk about follow through after that personal message. So the real emphasis is on making your expectations clear to our early learners and following through to give them the guidance to support their positive social behaviors. And we talked about a couple of kinds of reflections before. We talked about behavior reflections and paraphrase reflections. I'm going to add a third type of reflection today, and that's an affective reflection. It's very similar to the behavior reflection, which was describing something about the child or what they were doing, except an affective reflection is more of a comment on those things we can't directly observe. So, what a child might be feeling or thinking or what's motivating them. So, uh, to formulate an affective reflection, we have to recognize that the emotions that a child might be feeling and then using the reflection to name that emotion back to them. And as with a behavior reflection, the primary motivation here, the primary goal is to say, child, I recognize you, I see you, it's important to me what's going on. But there's a secondary purpose here too, just as there was with the other kinds of reflections, and that is to add to children's emotion vocabulary to foster their emotional development by helping them to recognize and label their own emotional states and the emotional states of others. So, because these are things that we can't directly observe and we're making an inference about, it's important with an affective reflection to make careful observations before we name that emotion, not to sort of jump the gun, and to recognize that children may express a wide range of emotions. And in our culture, some of those may be emotions that make us feel uncomfortable, that maybe we've been taught shouldn't be expressed in a social situation or that should be controlled. And so we have to recognize that children will express a wide variety of things. And as with the behavior reflection, this isn't a positive or a negative judgmental kind of statement. This is a non judgmental statement where we're naming the emotion, whether it's one that we in our own experiences have been taught to approve of or not. So, as with the other reflections, this is not about the child. This is directly to the child. So, it would begin with the child's name or the word you. Uh, and then we'll describe what we observed in terms of that feeling state or mental state. Because of that secondary vocabulary purpose, we're going to use a variety of feeling words over time. And as I said, we're going to acknowledge emotions, even if they're ones that we'd rather not be expressed in that setting. And sometimes we'll get it wrong because these are inferences. And we might say, uh, you're sad. And the child says, no, I'm not sad. I'm mad. Well, apologize and revise that and say, oh, you're angry right now. Some pitfalls that we can fall into with affective reflections. One is sounding all knowing, the sort of, I know you're upset, but I'll talk about the but in a second. Because we're making that inference, it can sound sometimes like we are saying that we know everything about how the child's feeling, and that's a mistake to avoid. We also don't want to be accusational. You're just jealous. Uh, that's that's really not a reflection. That's more of an accusatory kind of statement. Sometimes we feel like if we identify the child's emotion to them, then it should turn off. If we point out to them that they're angry, then they should be able to immediately control that anger. And if we step back and think about that, we know that that's not the case. We know that there are some folks who can cool down quickly and some who have a harder time. And so don't expect that we can just switch off that emotion by naming it. And also recognize that, as with adults, there are children who might not want to speak about how they're feeling right now, and we shouldn't try to force or coerce them into doing that. Here's some examples. A child says, "Look, I finished this all by myself." The reflection might be, "You're proud that you did it alone," or "You're pleased with the job you've done." A child says, "I can't find the piece that fits." We might say, "It's frustrating to look and not find the right piece," or "It bothers you that you can't find the right piece." The child puts their hands over the ears and say, "Shut up." So as the caring adults who are up here, we're not going to take this personally. We're going to recognize that that's anger in the child, and we say, "All the noise upsets you," or "You wish things were more quiet," or "You don't want me to talk to you now." Remember that in all these examples, the point of reference is coming from the child's point of view. It's never, "I see that you feel upset." So if the child says, "Don't touch me, I don't like you," the reflection is matter of fact. "You're angry with me," or "You don't want me to touch you." "I don't want to wash my face. I'm not dirty. I washed it this morning." The reflection is, "You're not sure why you have to wash your face again," or "You think you've already washed enough today." So when we make that reflection, remember, as I said, to observe carefully. Make sure the reflection describes the child's feeling, or I want to include thinking and mental states here too. Uh, those are from the child's perspective and not the adults. They are. You should always, as we add to this sequence in a minute, uh, remind yourself to describe the child's point of view before you say how you feel. There's a DAP rule here too, and it's something like this. Remember that behavior reflections are really great for toddlers, where we're talking about those very physical, concrete things and helping them with that vocabulary. It's still great for preschoolers. It's okay for kindergartners and first graders, but by middle childhood, it starts to, especially as we get into young adolescent, it starts to become less appropriate. And you'll remember for paraphrase reflections, it's probably a little less appropriate for our younger children, just because they're not as expressive verbally, but it's really great throughout the lifespan. For affective reflections, by about age 3, children are beginning to use more and more emotion vocabulary, and they're learning emotion vocabulary, and they're learning their own emotional cues. And so it's very developmentally appropriate in the preschool years into elementary up through young adolescence. So it's a little bit later than the behavior reflections. Okay, so but that doesn't mean you can't use, for a given kindergartner, behavior reflective and paraphrase reflections could all be appropriate. So there's a bit of understanding the DAP of that individual child and the situation. And finally, there's something that's really important here. Um, it can become a real habit that we need to not develop um, when we end the reflection, and this is particularly happens with affective reflections, with the word "but." It's just not needed to be there. So remember that these reflections are going to be the first step in this personal message sequence that we're going to talk about next. So imagine this. I say, "You are angry, but I need you to work on this thing right now." So the whole point of me saying that reflection was to say, "Hey, kid, I see what you're doing. I understand what's going on with you." And then I end it with, "But here's the thing I want you to do." And just that word, "but," is like saying, "I see you're angry. I don't really care." It kind of negates that whole positive purpose of that reflection. And the truth is, you don't really need the "but." If you said, "Did I ever show you this dog?" She's barking to get in. She's 17 years old. Isn't that crazy? Um, so if I said, "You're angry, I want you to finish this thing right now," that would mean the same thing as saying, "You're angry, but I want you to finish this right now." I just took the word "but" out. It doesn't take anything away from me guiding the child. But what it does take out is this idea that I really don't care that you're angry. So if you find yourself ending your reflection with "but" and then saying your point of view, just drop the word "but." There's no need for it. and the opportunity is there to add that kind of negative impression. So the second step in this sequence is going to be after the reflection for you to react and express your emotions to the child. So the first step was from the child's point of view. And the benefit of that in terms of internalizing self discipline is we start with the point that, child, this is your behavior, this is your emotion, this is what you're doing or what you're saying starts with you, and this is how it's having an impact on me. What you do has an impact on other people. And this is an important lesson for internalizing self-regulation for children who are egocentric, who thinks that everybody is seeing the world the same way they do. So they're starting to get this idea that I'm doing this and it's in having an impact on others. And if you think about it, it's kind of the opposite of you do what I say because I tell you to, which is the rules and the directions are all external to you and you don't have to internalize those. What's happening is the world's having direction on you rather than you having an impact on it. So our second step is going to be this reaction. We identify the emotion that we experience that's directly tied to what the child is doing or saying. This is what's called an I message. It's a brief statement. It's not a big long soliloquy. It's using an emotion word like I'm concerned, or I'm worried, or I'm excited, or I'm happy, or I'm upset, or I don't think that's fair. It's just saying what impact the child's behavior has on you to make it clear to the child that their behavior is having that impact. So we're going to want to use a variety of different words here in an intensity to match the kind of situation. And so this is the second step here in this whoopsie doodle. I hate when I mess up my slide when I'm recording myself. All right. So we have this personal message sequence, and the first step is to reflect. The second step is to react, to express your emotions to the children. And the third point is the third thing to say is to pinpoint a reason for that reaction. What was it about the child's behavior that's affecting you? You are running inside. I'm worried. Well, why are you worried? I'm worried you will fall. And so it's not something about the child's person, about their character, about who they are. It's about that behavior or comment or feeling that you reflected on. You're just making it clear, how does this behavior, why is it impacting you? And this is the kind of statement that's associated with authoritarian, not authoritarian, authoritative kinds of discipline, right? This is induction, the giving a reason behind uh, why there needs to be directions and guidance and expectations to behavior. We give that reason, we give specific reasons for why we are happy for that behavior or why we would like to see it change. The reasons are in words and vocabulary that children can understand. These are not big, long statements. They're very succinct and to the point. And every time we want to change a child's behavior, every time we want to substitute a different behavior for what they're doing, we should give a reason for that. That's that induction and authoritative kind of direction. So the next step after we give that reason is to formulate a rule and a redirection. And I'll tell you this, I make this distinction. This is just me. Not everybody has this different use of the words rules and redirections. It's just, it helps me as I think about it. To me, a rule means that it's always a rule, that if it's a rule for everybody, it's a rule for all the time. I'm going to have to make sure that that rule is consistently followed by everyone. It can go and write it up on the wall because it's written in stone. A redirection means I don't have this standing rule about it, but but to protect the safety of this child and the other children or the positive flow of the day, I need to redirect what they're doing into something else. They're doing something that can be disruptive or harmful, and I need to replace that with something else. And my belief is that I don't need a rule for every possible thing. In fact, I'm better off not trying to think of every possible thing that could happen and making a rule about it, because then I'm always having to make sure that I'm imposing the rules, and my job becomes a manager. I'm managing the classroom, making sure the rules are always being followed. I want to be a guider. I want to help those children develop their own sense of internal regulation and be able to regulate their own behavior. And so I want as few rules as I can possibly have to write up on the wall and have them all the time. And so I make this distinction between rules and redirections because it's so important that if I do make this a rule, I'm consistent and I follow through every single time. So as I'm thinking about these things that I think differently about, in order to think what's appropriate for a rule or redirection for a given classroom or a given group of children, I have to understand child development norms. I have to know what are age related expectations here. I have to know these children individually. What are their strengths? What kind of behaviors can I appropriately expect for them? This is all DAP. And I have to think about what the child has to be able to do, what they have to know and do in order to follow that rule or to follow that redirection. I have to make sure that my rules and redirections are legitimate, that they're really there for the long term best interest of this child and the other children, that it's associated with their long term development, that it's not something just to get me through the next 15 minutes because I need a break. I have to also make sure they know what these expectations are. I cannot just assume, oh, these children are in kindergarten, they know to do this by now. If I have to make sure I explicitly state what those expectations are, and I should recognize when children are trying to follow those expectations, they're trying to live up to them. They may not be hitting it 100%, but I should reward them and praise them for making those attempts when they truly are attempting to follow those. Positive attributions is sort of giving the benefit of the doubt here instead of saying, "Oh, you're being naughty, you're being bad." I use this positive attribution to think of a way of framing that they're trying the positive thing, or a way that they can reflect to themselves that I'm making progress here. So I don't frame those behavior problems, or I don't really I don't really want to use these kind of words because I don't want to give you these connotations, but things like misbehavior, I don't want to call that to the children because I don't want them to hear that I'm the misbehaving kid, I'm the bad kid. So I'm going to phrase it as something that needs to change, a behavior that they need to improve or replace with another. Sometimes, now I've made a big point talking about that if I make a rule, it needs to always be the rule. That doesn't mean I can't change the rule. But if I do so, I need to do that publicly. I need to do it at a group time so that every child understands, we've had this rule that says this, and I'm seeing that we're having a really hard time, and maybe that's not working out. So I'm going to change the rule to that. And so it's not that I just quit imposing the rule one day, because then what it looks like is that I'm just being inconsistent and I'm encouraging the children to test me and see if I really mean it when I say that this is the rule. If I'm not sure about why the child isn't following that rule or that redirection or living up to that expectation, I should assume that they have not, and this is if I'm really not sure. I should assume that they don't understand it rather than conclude that they're trying to push the limits or they're trying to intentionally break the rule. Now, I'm not saying that children will never test your limits. In fact, they will. But I'm saying if I'm in doubt, I should assume that more positive interpretation. You should get in the habit of practicing what you want children to be doing. We talked last week about giving positive directions, about telling children what to do. And that should be That should be a mental habit you're getting into. Not just what you don't want them doing, what is it you want to see? Because your rules and your redirection should always be in that positive manner, as you know. Catch yourself when you say things like no or stop. Remember that our young concrete thinkers they're not able to mentally reverse things. If I just say no, they can't mentally undo what they're doing. I need to tell them what it is they should be doing. As children are younger and less experienced, I give them those alternatives and choices. As they get older and more experienced in a classroom or a social setting, I ask them, what could you be doing differently? What should you be doing right now? I let them generate those alternatives and reflect and think about it. Don't expect a child to do that if they don't have that experience and that knowledge. So this is a part of DAP and understanding each child. You should talk and act at the same time. This personal message shouldn't be a big long speech. It should be direct. So you're moving toward the child. You're coming from where you are, and you're in action as you speak. As children, especially as they grow older through the preschool and early childhood and elementary years, invite them to think about what expectations are, what rules could be. There's an example uh, in your readings that, for example, field trips are a really good opportunity to do about this. I think of like a 4-year-old group going on a field trip to an airport or somewhere in their community, and during a group time we could write down what the rules are, and I could invite the children, what is an important rule? And they'll say things like, make sure you can see where an adult is, make sure we all stay together. And I'm getting them to think that the reason for the rules, the reason behind the rules, is that it's to keep us all safe, to keep us all they're there to protect us. And it's not just there because the adult says so. There's a reason behind them. And the way to really encourage children to do that is to let them think about what rules should be and have some experience in making them themselves. This is that complete personal message sequence. So the first step is a reflection. It could be behavior, paraphrase, or effective as appropriate for that situation and that child. But here we're starting from the child's point of view, and that's the really important part of this sequence. Part two is your reaction and the reason for that reaction. So you describe your emotion and the reason uh, behind that emotion. The third part, if you need to redirect the child, if the behavior is something that doesn't meet your expectations, is to give that rule a redirection, to tell the child what to do rather than what not to do. We could also have a positive personal message, which is really just those first two steps, the reflection and the react and reason. Um, we do this when we want to see that behavior continue or to be repeated. It's a type of really effective and sincere praise. You're, in the example here, is you're putting away the blocks. I'm happy you knew it was cleanup time. So the reflection, you're putting away the blocks. I'm happy. The reaction, you knew it was cleanup time, is the reason. I don't need a rule or a redirection here because this is the behavior I want to see continue. So this becomes a really effective way of praising a child and encouraging that behavior to continue. So the point is to think of a personal message as something that you should use in positive situations as well as negative situations. Some pitfalls that we can fall into. One is we talk in this big long paragraph. You are running inside the school building across the classroom. I am concerned that you could slip and fall and knock something down and someone could get hurt. Because of my concerns, you should walk from the beginning to the end. Always walk inside. That's a classroom rule and it's written on the wall. You see how I just like, la, 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 la. All it needs to be is you're running inside. I'm worried you'll fall. Walk. We keep it simple and straightforward. Sometimes adults will, especially beginning teachers, won't use that personal message because they're afraid, oh, what if I forget that step? Or what if I get the reflection wrong? Or what if I say my side before that side? It's like anything else. You don't some of us, and I'll put myself here, we didn't have adults talking to us with positive guidance when we were young children, and so the scripts in our head aren't this isn't there yet. This script for a personal message isn't there, and so we get it by practicing and doing it. And I promise you, you're not going to break a child if you get it in the wrong order. One of my favorite things I ever saw, uh, I was observing in a classroom. I was observing the student teacher, and the head teacher was doing uh, this is in a Head Start classroom with 4-year-olds, and she was a very experienced teacher, had a master's degree. She was just really great teacher, and she said to this child who was moving around while she was reading the book, she said, I don't remember the child's name, but she said, "Child's name, you are moving. I'm afraid I will lose you. Sit still." Okay. I said to her later, "You're afraid you're going to lose children? What? That doesn't," and just kind of jokingly, it didn't make sense. In her mind, she was afraid she'd lose where the kid was. And you know what? The kid said quietly, and it was fine. It doesn't matter that she kind of made a silly statement there. It, it was okay. So don't be afraid. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good and think, oh, I can't get this exactly right. I'm just not going to do it. Uh, Remember, we're trying to support children in their long term development of self regulation skills, and any parts of this sequence are beneficial. It's also a mistake to only talk about how a child's behavior is impacting your feelings when it's something negative. So make sure you're using those personal messages to talk about those positive emotions as well. Sometimes we'll kind of give up halfway. We're not seeing the results that we hope to see. And so we'll stop thinking about those long term goals and start thinking about the short term goals, just getting through today. And so keep your eye on the horizon and thinking about those long term goals. We also don't make our expectations known from across the room. We remember that act and speak at the same time. Um, we shouldn't wait too long to express how things are impacting us, and we should not assume that children should just know our expectations or disguise them. We need to make them explicit and clear and stated. Here's some examples of personal messages, or an example. Walter is eager to look more closely at the fish, and as you walk by, he reaches into the aquarium, pulls out a fish, and begins to examine it very carefully. And the adult doesn't act with shock. They very matter of factly say, "You're curious." That's the reflection, and that's the appropriate reflection. Walter is curious. This is an affective reflection. The reaction is, "I'm worried." The reason, the fish will die because it has no water, and the redirection is to put it back. So here the adult doesn't overreact. They don't uh, act with a negative or punitive way. They're matter of fact. They understand from the child's perspective that they're curious and interested, and so they redirect them into a positive behavior that can protect that situation. All right.